Well, first off, there's a language barrier. Even despite the fact that, I speak Spanish, she speaks English, I mean, you know how that works. Sometimes certain things get kind of lost in translation. Like, for instance, something until very recently that would, like, freak me out a lot. It's like, if I would say, te amo, and she would say, yo también. See, in English, if you say, yeah, me too, it's kind of like bad luck. It's kind of like insincere almost. But, cause I talked to someone, another friend of mine from Mexico, and I was like, is this normal? She's like, oh yeah, that's what everyone says. I'm like, oh, okay. I feel better now. That was one thing. It was just one example of kind of a linguistic barrier to, the proceedings. Senses of humor kind of can, my sense of humor is different from her sense of humor. She doesn't really have that kind of, you know how I'm kind of an asshole? She's not, and she doesn't always think as funny as I do, which is probably a good thing, but, so that's more of an interpersonal thing than a international, cultural thing.
Oh, I tend to, slurp whenever I drink coffee, and, I was told that's a no-no in Mexico. I found that out the hard way last month. She takes for freaking ever to get ready, and she sleeps all the time. But I think that's just her. I don't think that's like a cultural difference. Or if it is, I don't realize it. But yeah. Well, see, I met the parents before, like a year ago, and that was just because I went down to visit, and then that was when kind of things sort of took off. But it wasn't bad. It was just sort of like I wasn't around them very much. In this trip, I got to know them a little bit more. But I get along with them pretty well. I mean, her father and I get along really well. We're tight. Her brothers, I get along with them. I don't know them very well just because we never really hung around with them very much. Her mom intimidates me a little bit, but she's really cool. But she's kind of like the boss, and she was kind of the one who was always like, if we were like together, she was kind of the one who's always like keeping an eye on us, kind of like, what are you kids doing? And I'm like, I'm 23. At what point am I back in high school? But that's that was another thing because we talked about that because she still lives with her family, which is much more common in Mexico. The one thing she said that really kind of freaked me out was that she said her grandmother wanted to meet me to see if I was good for her, and I'm like, oh god. And she's like, and then she's like, kind of just, I think she was jokingly, she says, she was like, yeah, she doesn't really like Americans that much. But, yeah, she's like, she doesn't normally like them, but you'll be fine. I'm like, oh Jesus. She said, just be yourself. I'm like, oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god. And so that was a little nerve wracking. But we went over. We'd been there like 2 days, I think. And then finally went over, like, I actually made dinner at her house. And, yeah, it went pretty well. One second. We got to be really good friends while she was here. And then she was sort of with this other, she was sort of seeing this guy while she was here, and I was sort of, and I kind of think for her, and then I kind of started seeing this other girl, who was also international, which, anyway, so, I mean, we stayed. She went back to Mexico at the end of that semester, and then we stayed in touch. And I kind of like went through a breakup, and then she was, there, just something on the running support, and then I went away for summer and then stayed in touch with her, and then came back, and then she was like, I went to Europe for summer, and then came back, and she's like, when you come back to Mexico? And I'm like, well, ASAP, I guess. And then I like seriously started planning to do that, and then that was right about when I dropped out of grad school the first time, and then kind of like had to put that on hold. We kind of just, one thing we were both at different points, I guess, and then we had been when we left, and then one thing sort of led to another, and then had to come back, and then we were kind of like, well, now what do we do? Of course, I took my sweet time. I was like, I didn't even kiss her for the day I left, actually, because I was too nervous to do it. But, so, came back, and then we kept talking. We talked a lot more, and then one day, right about the end of the semester, because I mean, about like end of April, beginning of May, I was just like, look, here's the deal. This is how I feel. And she's like, well, I feel the same way too, but we've got to kind of like think about this before we do it. And I'm like, okay, you get a point. She's like, are we even going? I mean, our lives going in different directions? And I'm like, well, I mean, you're thinking about this a bit much. I mean, I think I made the argument that we're like, well, if we're at the points in our lives, like if we want to do something about it, we can. So we decided to sort of just give it a shot, I guess. But it wasn't until a little bit later, like right after that, like I was like, some friends came to visit and they knew her, and then they asked me what was going up with that, and I'm like, well, we're sort of a thing. And then I don't know, we'd never really officially said yes or no. And then finally I just asked her, I was like, are we exclusive? She's like, yeah, aren't we? I'm like, okay, yeah, we're good. I'm like, and then, eventually I put it on Facebook, and she was like, all right, if you insist. I'm like, okay. I am by no means an expert on any kind of relationship, but I think the biggest trick to it, in my experience, is just kind of going with the flow and not trying not to get too upset about it. Which, sometimes it's frustrating when, she's, not available, or, if I'm not available, it's just one of those things, and it's frustrating too, because I'm kind of like she says I'm what she calls cursi, which is kind of cheesy, which, I admit and embrace. And she's not, and so it's kind of like, sometimes I'm kind of doing all this stuff, and I'm like, I'm like, why aren't you? And she's like, cause, I don't know, alright, fair enough. So, but, I'm definitely the more, like, openly emotional one, and she's just kind of like to chill. She doesn't really like to, you have to, like, kind of pick at her to get her to, like, say things sometimes, or to say what she's feeling sometimes, or what she's thinking, because she doesn't admit it sometimes, but yeah, like I said, I'm no expert.